Hi there, it's John Tolvanen and I would like to welcome you to the CE marking training video. In this first lecture, we are going to take a overall look at the construction product CE markings. We have decided to divide this first training into three parts. First, we are going to take a really quick look at the CE markings in general and kind of like tie the CE markings of construction products to the CE markings of other products. So we're kind of like creating context here. In the second part, we are going to take a more detailed look at the CE marking of construction products, and we're going to be talking about what the CE marking actually is and is not. And in the last part, we are going to see how the CE marking project always progresses and what kind of steps we have and what kind of actors we have there. So after this lecture, I really hope that you're going to have a really good idea of an overall idea of what the construction product CE markings really are and what they require of you. But without further ado, let's get started. And the first point I would like to just make here in the beginning is that CE markings are not a new thing. And in fact, CE markings have been around for 20 years or something like that. And they first were introduced as part of machinery after the machinery directive. And nowadays, now ever since, the CE markings have been included into more and more different kind of products. And nowadays, if you go and browse through your office or home, you're going to find the CE markings are absolutely everywhere. Nowadays, all the toys must be CE marked, like this rubber duck, and if you have kids and you buy them puzzle, the puzzle is going to be CE marked. All medical devices are CE marked, all electric devices are CE marked, like laptops, computers, cell phones, screens, TVs, and so on. And nowadays, even the construction products start to be CE marked, like windows, doors, asphalt, and so on. So CE markings basically everywhere. And so the thing with the construction product CE marking is that you're not being singled out by the EU, and you are not being picked on by your government, but instead the CE marking is just being introduced to the construction products. So the construction products are brought into the whole CE marking schema that has been going on for more than 20 years now. The next thing I would just like to point out is that even though the CE marking is the same with every product, so we have always the CE symbol. This can be found in the toys and lifts, escalators, cell phones, computers, and so on. But how you can get there, if you are a manufacturer of low voltage products or machinery or medical devices, varies quite a lot. And the variation is due to the legislation that must be used to CE mark the product. So for example, we have low voltage directive that gives out the instructions and dictates how you must CE mark a product with low voltage. And it's different from the machinery directive that dictates how you must CE mark a machinery, and so on. So we have all these different laws and regulations. In total, we have 25 different ones, and each of them tell a different story on how you can get there, even though the goal is the same. In this training, we are not going to be going too much into details on how to CE mark a low voltage product, or how to CE mark a machinery, or medical device, or a lift, or a toy, or a safety product, or any other product besides the construction product. So in this training, we are going to be concentrating on the construction products. But the thing I just wanted to point out here in the beginning is that the CE marking is the same in each and every product group, or with each and every law, but how you can get to the CE marking varies quite a lot. So if you are good at CE marking machinery, it doesn't translate that you know how to CE mark a construction product right away, even though it helps quite a lot. But for the rest of this training, we are just going to be concentrating on the construction products and how to CE mark a construction product. And I think it goes without saying that the construction product regulation can be blamed, so to say, for the mandatory CE markings. So without construction product regulation, you wouldn't be watching this video, and you wouldn't have to CE mark your products. But how the construction product regulation has been built is that the law itself, or the regulation itself, doesn't have any instructions on how you must CE mark a certain product. So for example, if you are a manufacturer of a window, the construction product regulation doesn't have instructions for you on how you must CE mark the window in practice. So what we have with the construction products is that it has made these called harmonized standards mandatory for the CE marking. So even though the construction product regulation doesn't have any instructions on how you can CE mark your product, it's always referencing to the harmonized standards that have the detailed instructions on how you must CE mark a product. And here I would just like to point out that if your product doesn't have a harmonized standard, you don't have to CE mark the product. But the problem with these harmonized standards is that there are over 500 of them at the moment, and each and every one of them concerns themselves with a different product or product group. So for example, we have the EN 1091 that deals with all structural steel products. So because we have a standard called EN 1090, sorry for my handwriting. So we have this harmonized standard called EN 1091 that deals with structural steel products. So it makes all structural products so that you must CE mark them. And then we have, for example, 12899 that makes the traffic signs, that makes the CE marking for traffic signs mandatory. And we have standard 13242 that makes the CE marking mandatory for aggregates and so on. So we have 500 different kind of standards that make the CE marking mandatory for those product groups that the harmonized standards cover. But then naturally the next question is that how you can tell if your product has a harmonized standard or not. Because if it doesn't have, you don't have to CE mark it, and if it does, you must CE mark it. So the natural question is how you can determine if your product must be CE marked or not. And the way to do it is basically presented here. I'm not sure if this is the best way, but this is how I would do it if I were you. And it consists of two parts. First, we have the European Commission site that has listed all harmonized standards. But the problem here is that this site only has the titles of the standards and also the reference number to the standards, but nothing more. But what you are required to do is to determine if your product falls under the scope of any of the standards. So here from the European Commission site we can identify possible standards where the title kind of like matches your product. But then what we must do is go to the Estonian Standards Center's website, where we can see the preview of each of these standards, and then we can determine if the scope of the standards include your product. So let's take a look at how you can do it in practice. So here we have the European Commission's website, and here the European Commission has listed all the different harmonized standards that have been published. And this list is somewhere around 500 standards at the moment. And if we take an example, and let's talk about a manufacturer of doors, like garage doors. What we would have to do is go through all these titles and think about, could they potentially include our product, garage doors. So what we would do is go to the find property of your browser and just type in a search word. In this case I would use door, and in this case we would find 7 matches or probable matches for standards where there is a door in the title. And what I would do next, and I would recommend you to do, is go through all these different options and see if the title has anything to do with your product. And here we can see that this first standard, EN1154, is mainly should deal with something like controlled door closing devices. So it's not actually the door itself, but the door closing device, and we are not manufacturing this, so this standard here wouldn't concern us. And then we would go to the next standard, and this one also deals with something else beside the door, and in this case electrically powered hold open devices for swing doors. So this wouldn't concern us either. And then we would go over all these 7 options, and in this case we would find one standard that is EN132411 that deals with industrial, commercial and garage doors and gates. And in this case we would be like, hey, this could actually concern us as this has all the keywords in the title. But by just looking at this title here, we can never be sure if this standard actually concerns us or if the scope of this standard includes our product or not. So what we must do then is take this standards reference and copy it, and then go to the Estonian Center for Standardization's webpage called evs.ee. And if this website is in Estonian, you can change it from here in the upper right hand corner to the English, so it's much easier for you to use. And then we have this search bar here, and here you would type the identification of the number that we identified here in the European Commission site, and then we would just push go and see what it comes up with. And then this site would return all the possible standards that either have the keyword in the title, and these are what we are looking for, or it has this standard in its reference standards, like here. But what we are interested in is the harmonized standards itself, and in this case it would be the EN132411. And don't be bothered with this initial EVS here. It's just the identification of this Estonian Center for Standardization. And if you were looking at BSI's website, you would see that it includes the BSI EN132411. Or if you were at the Finnish website, you would have SFS EN and so on. So the first 3 or 2 letters here in front of the standard only means the local authority who's kind of like responsible for the standards in that country. So what you're looking for is the first EN and then the code that comes after it. And that's the only thing that matters, not what's in front of it. And here, because this is the Estonian site, so what you must do then is to find this standard that has the right code. And here, take a look at the standard that has both English and Estonian languages. So in this case, we don't have only the Estonian one, and we only have the English and Estonian one. So then we would just go here to the view and buy section. And from here we want to take the preview and the preview in English, and it's just going to open in a PDF. And then we get this preview of the standard, and what we are looking for here is the scope of this standard, and it's always, or let's say 99% of the cases, it's the section 1 scope. And then what we would have to do is go through this scope letter by letter and determine if our doors fall under this scope or not. And then it becomes quite obvious that if your door doesn't fall under this scope, you don't have to use this standard, this harmonized standard, to CE mark your product. But if your product actually falls under the scope of this standard, then it means that you must CE mark your products based on the instructions given out in this standard. So go to the European Commission's website and look for the standards that have your keyword in the title. Then go to the Estonian Standards Center and look for the same code, and then take a preview, and from the preview take a look at the scope. And if your product falls under the scope, you must CE mark your product based on that standard instructions. So this is one of the options how you can take a look and find out if your product has a harmonized standard or not. But I think that's enough about the generalities, and basically what we went over there is what the CE marking is and how the construction product CE marking is related to other product CE marking. And then we talk a little bit about the harmonized standards and how to find out if your product has harmonized standards. But now let's take a closer look at what is actually the point of a CE mark in a construction product. And just as a forewarning, I would just like to say that what we are going to be talking here doesn't apply to other products. So what's the point of a CE mark in a construction product doesn't translate that this is the same thing with machinery, or this is the same thing with medical devices or toys and so on. So we're just talking about what is the point of a CE mark in a construction product. So in its essence, if we take all other things away, a CE marking is nothing more but a way to declare products' essential characteristics. It is not a sign of quality. It is not sign of, especially it's not sign of good quality. It is just a unified way to declare products' characteristics. So a CE marking in its essence is just a listing of product characteristics that the manufacturer has determined and nothing more. So in some instances you hear that CE marking is a quality thing or whatever. It in fact has nothing to do with quality, and it's just a listing of characteristics. And what the CE marking also does is to unify the way in which the product characteristics are declared. So basically what the standard does is it unifies the vocabulary, and with the CE marking there is only one way to declare stability and what is meant by stability. And there is only one way, and there is only one meaning for wind load, and there is only one meaning for durability, there is only one meaning for shadow properties, and so on. So with the CE markings and with the harmonized standards, there is only one way to define product characteristics. And it actually becomes quite obvious if we take a look at some example CE markings. And here we have a CE marking for structural steel product. In this case it's welded steel beam. Here we have a CE mark for roller shutter, and here we have a CE mark for steel tank. And if we forget everything that's above here, and this is just general information regarding the manufacturer and what standard are used to CE mark the product, and we look at everything that's below this, we can see that the CE marking actually is nothing more than a list of characteristics. So here we have the characteristics that are related to this welded steel beam: geometrical tolerances, fracture toughness, weldability, and so on. And here we have the characteristics that are related to this shutter, wind resistance. And here we have the characteristics that are related to steel tanks, wall thickness, and dangerous substances. And the thing is that each and every single CE marking looks something like this. with construction products. So at the bottom we have, no, at the top we have the identifying information of the manufacturer and also the product, and then we have a list of characteristics and nothing more. And what I said before is that the standards that we use to CE mark the product basically unify what is meant by each characteristics and how to define it. So, for example, if we have defined our shutter's wind resistance to be technical class 3, it means that the wind resistance in itself has been defined and standardized in the standard. So there is no variation between different manufacturers on how they have defined this characteristic called wind resistance. So if we have two shutters next to each other from different manufacturers, and both of them declare these characteristics called wind resistance, and one of them has technical class 3, and the other one would have technical class 2, we as a customer would be certain and could be comfortable comparing these two products with each other, because we know that both manufacturers have defined the wind resistance the same way, and they have also actually determined the product's wind resistance in the same way. The same thing goes for every other product and every other CE mark. So for example, if we have reaction to fire as one of the characteristics that is declared as part of the CE marking, we can be sure that this, how the manufacturer has defined reaction to fire, is similar to every other manufacturer who has CE marked their structural steel product. And wall thickness has always, with each and every CE marking, has been defined the same way, and this property has been determined the same way. So if this manufacturer says that their wall thickness is class A, and the other competing manufacturer says that their wall thickness is also class A, we know for sure that the wall thickness in both products is comparable with each other. So just to reiterate this thing, CE marking is not a sign of quality. A CE marking has nothing to do with quality, but CE marking in construction products is just a list of essential characteristics that can be declared. And the way they have been declared and determined is always the way that was presented in the standard. So these products are comparable with each other. So I have already been mentioning it a little bit, but in addition of standardizing the characteristics, the CE marking also standardizes the way how the manufacturer determines the characteristics. So there is now, with CE marking, there is a unified way, a unified definition of each and every characteristics that is presented in the CE marking, and a unified way to determine them. So the products actually become comparable with each other. And the harmonized standards have detailed instruction on how to determine each characteristics, and also what characteristics can be determined and can be presented in the CE marking. So, as a summary, CE marking is not a quality mark, but it's just a unified way to declare and determine products' essential characteristics. I'm just gonna go ahead of myself. These are listed in the standard, so manufacturers don't have the ability or the freedom to decide what characteristics to present in the CE marking, but these are given out in the standard. But this leads that the CE marking has unified the way to declare and determine the product's essential characteristics, leads directly to the conclusion that with CE mark, products from different manufacturers and products manufactured in different EU countries are comparable with each other in terms of performance, not in terms of quality, but in terms of performance, with relation to these essential characteristics that are given in the CE mark. So, in the last section, we went over basically what is meant with the CE marking and what the CE marking symbolizes, and we saw that the CE marking is nothing more than a list of characteristics. So now let's try to see what is required for manufacturer to draw the CE marking, what is required of you to CE mark your products. Because we have already talked about this harmonized standards and standards requirements and so on. So let's take a closer look at what is meant by those. And the first thing here I would like to just say that the CE marking is just a manufacturer's guarantee that their product characteristics are what they say in the CE marking. And so you don't have to apply for a CE mark. You don't apply from any government agency or non-profit. You just affix the CE marking to your product when you think that your product, once you determine and think that your product's characteristics have been determined in the appropriate way. And the important thing is that they have proof of this. So they have proof that their product's characteristics are what they say they are. So if we are saying that our product's wind class is 3, then we actually have proof of this, that we can say to a third party, or we can say to a government inspector or whoever, that we can prove that our product's wind class is actually 3. But in essence, a CE marking project is divided into 2 parts. So first we have the thing about determining the product's essential characteristics, and these characteristics are those that are presented in the CE marking as a list. So we have the CE mark, and then we have the list of characteristics that are given out in the CE marking. So one part of the CE marking project is to determine the characteristics, and this means first we must choose which characteristics to determine, and then we must decide on how to determine them. And for both, we are going to see later, there are strict step-by-step instructions on how to do it. So, and the second part of the CE marking project is to set up a factory production control system. This is kind of like quality management system, but not really, because it has nothing to do with quality, or at least improving quality. But the thing to remember at this point is that the CE marking project is divided into 2 parts. First, the determination of product's essential characteristics, and then the setup of factory production control system. And this is usually abbreviated like FPC. That comes from factory production control. And why we have these 2 things in the CE marking in the first place is that the thing is that CE marking is valid for as long as you can guarantee that the characteristics are still the same. So if we would CE mark our door today, the CE marking would be valid from here till the end of the times, as long as we can guarantee that the characteristics of that door haven't changed. From this we can see how it actually, the factory production control and the product's characteristics relate to each other. So first we would just determine the characteristic before we CE mark our product in a type testing. So in this case, we would just, if we were manufacturing a shutter, we would just determine that by test that our product's wind resistance is technical class 3. And then we would just set up the factory production control system and CE mark our product. So this is the point of time when we CE mark our product. So now we would have CE marked shutter. And then we would have the factory production control system in place. And with this factory production control system, or very loosely a quality management system, through it we would assure that the wind resistance of our shutter would remain the same. So in the beginning we would just determine the essential characteristic called wind resistance. And with the factory production control system, through tests and controls and so on, we would make sure that the wind resistance stays the same. And this is the point of the whole CE marking project, divided into two parts, into the testing and to the factory production control. So we would just perform this testing once, and then we would assure ourselves that the characteristics remain the same with the factory production control system over time. And naturally, if we introduce new products, we would go over this process again. With the first, we would test the new product, and then we would assure that the characteristics stay the same with the factory production control system. But in a sense, we don't have to retest our products again to determine the values, because we can guarantee them with the factory production control system. But again, you as a manufacturer don't have to come up with what needs to be done. You don't have to decide for yourself what kind of characteristics to determine, and you don't have to determine yourself how the FPC needs to be set up. You don't have to decide what CE marking includes and what needs to be done. But all of these are given out in detail in the standard, and in specifically the harmonized standard. And if we think about what needs to be done, we can look at the standard as it has detailed instruction on what needs to be done, and especially who can perform what. And in this point, I'm just already going to say you that in some instances, manufacturer can perform everything, meaning determining the characteristics and also setting up the FPC system. But in some cases, the manufacturer must employ the services of a third party to either determine the characteristics or in the certification of FPC system, meaning that the third party must verify that you have set up the FPC system appropriately. But now let's just take a look at what needs to be done and who can perform these tasks. And all instructions depend on the product's AVCP system, or is called Assessment and Verification of Constancy of Performance System. So this means basically, in layman's terms, the division of labor in terms of CE marking. And the rule of thumb here is that the more critical the product, the more likely it is that you must employ a third party, meaning a product certification body or a test laboratory. And the tasks assigned to the third party increase when the class decreases from class or system 4 to system +1. And if we take a really overall view of this whole system, we can see that here we have listed all the different AVCP systems that are available to the CE marking of construction product. So the available possibilities are +1, 1, +2, 3, and 4. And here we can also see that the tasks that must be performed are setting up and documenting the FPC. And in relation to this, we have the FPC certification, where the third party basically verifies that we have set up the FPC properly. And then we have, in some cases, that we have to perform some supplementary product testing as part of the FPC. So here we have the things that relate to the factory production control. So the second step in the CE marking process. And then we have these two, product testing and random product checks, that relate to the determining of the product characteristics before we CE mark the product. So we have two kinds of tasks here. So we have the setting up the FPC and certifying the FPC, and also the product testing. And here, in the best case scenario in terms of product cost and also the project duration, we have the system 4, where manufacturer himself or herself can set up and document the FPC system and also perform the product testing or determining the product's characteristics based on the standard instructions. And as you remember, once we start to move from 4 to System 1 Plus, the division of labor and tasks assigned to the manufacturer decrease, and at the same time the tasks and responsibilities assigned to the certification body or test laboratory increase. So in the System 4 we had the situation where the manufacturer could perform everything, and in the System 1 Plus we have the situation where the manufacturer only has the possibility to set up and document the FPC and then do supplementary product testing as part of the FPC. So this is only the quality assurance. And then we have to employ a certification body to do the product testing, but also perform random product checks. And then we have to also ask them to certify our FPC system. So we have a certification body in 3 tasks, and this can be quite expensive, and this can also take quite a long time to get them involved in the process. But in this last slide we were talking about this class depends on how critical the product is, or how big the risk of the usage of the product is to the customer and so on. But you don't have to decide this for yourself, but this is actually given out in the standard in very specific terms. So and especially it's given in the Appendix ZA of the harmonized standard. So here we have a harmonized standards Appendix ZA, and here we have the table actually ZA2 that deals with the attestation of conformity system. So this is the AVCP systems, and here we have the product that this deals with. It's called steel tanks, and here we have the different options. Now let's put it like this. And in this case you can see that the steel tank, that is one product, has 3 options regarding the attestation on conformity systems, and also by extension it has 3 possible ways of dividing tasks between you and a third party. And in this case you would be able to perform everything yourself. In this case you would have to give some task to a laboratory, and in this case you would have to involve a certification body to certify your FPC system and also perform some product testing. But the system that you must follow depends on the intended use of the product, so in this case steel tank. And you can see a description of the intended use here for each and every case. And then you would have to decide for yourself which of these intended uses is suited for our steel tank. So if it's just for installation for the transport, disposal, storage of water, not intended for human consumption, it would mean that attestation and conformity system is 4, when you can by yourself perform the product testing and also by yourself verify that you have the FPC system. And then if the intended use of the steel tank is transportation, distribution, storage of fuel intended for the supply of building, heating and cooling systems. So if we are actually storing something else besides water there, then it would be system 3, and it would mean that you would have to employ the services of laboratory to determine some of the characteristics of the steel tank. So you cannot determine all the characteristics by yourself. And in the system 1 you would have to where there are fire regulations in place. And in this case, if we decide that okay, our steel tanks intended use is just the storage of water that is not intended for the human consumption, we would use the system 4 to CE mark our product. And then in the same appendix, and actually in the same next table, we would have the tasks divided based on the decision we made in the previous table. And in this case, we would only have tasks for the manufacturer. So we would have the task of setting up the factory production control system and the task of performing initial type testing. This initial type testing is basically just first You decide what characteristics to declare and then determining them. And if we had made some other decisions and we were talking about other products, and here we have a example of the same table as before, we would have the division of labor differently. So here we are talking about the structural steel and aluminum components. Then here the system would be 2+. So we would have some tasks that are the responsibility of the manufacturer, and then we would have some tasks that are given out to the certification body, and in this case this. So here we can see that the manufacturer is in charge of initial type testing or determining the product's essential characteristics. The manufacturer is responsible for setting up and documenting factory production control, and the manufacturer is also responsible for the sampling, testing and inspection at the factory, so testing of the products being manufactured. As for the certification body, they would be responsible for the initial inspection of factory production control and also the continuous surveillance, assessment and approval of FPC. So basically this would mean that you would set up the FPC system and then you would ask a certification body to give you a certificate for the FPC system. So basically this certification body would just say that or determine if you have set up the FPC correctly or not. But naturally this begs the question of what kind of characteristics you must determine and how you must determine them. And the thing is that all possible characteristics are listed in the harmonized standard, and we're going to take a look at what those listings look like. But the thing to remember here is that standard only gives you the maximum number of characteristics that can be declared as part of your CE mark. And here the key is maximum number of characteristics. So the standards appendix ZA only gives you the option that which characteristics you can declare. And then we have the other part, the construction product regulation, that mandates you to declare at least one characteristic. So it is up to you to determine how many and which of the characteristics you want to declare, as long as it's at least one, and as long as all the characteristics that you declare are given out in the appendix CA. And if we take an example here, and here we can see again in the appendix CA that all the characteristics or essential characteristics that can be declared as part of the CE mark. And they are always defined in this kind of way, that there is a list of characteristics that can be given out in the CE marking, and all these would be just listed under the CE marking. So we would have the CE and then some information about the company, and then we would have all these characteristics that you decide to declare in a list form, and then that would be your CE marking. But like I said in the previous slide, these are the potential characteristics that you can declare in your CE marking, not those that you must declare in your CE marking. So you can decide to declare all these characteristics: reaction to fire, mechanical resistance and stability in terms of wall thickness and welding, internal pressure, permeability, release of dangerous substances, and durability against corrosion. So you can decide to declare all of these characteristics, or you can just decide to declare one of them, or you can decide to declare 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them. But the thing is to just remember that you can decide how many characteristics you are going to declare and which of the characteristics you are going to leave out. But if you decide to, for example, declare the characteristics related to mechanical resistance and stability called wall thickness and welding, we would again see the instructions on how to determine them and what they actually mean here. And here this column right here gives you the place where you must look for on how to declare the characteristics of wall thickness. In this case, it would be the section 4.3.6.1 of this harmonized standard, where we have this appendix CA. And then for the welding, how to determine the welding, we would have the 4.11.4. And in this case, if we were to declare only the essential characteristics of wall thickness and welding, we would have the CE marking. And then we would have wall thickness. I'm just gonna put VT here. And then we would determine it with the instruction given out here. And then we would get the class, let's say it's like class A. And then we would have the welding, and we would just call it welding, and we would just determine is it pass or fail, and here we would just put P. So this would be the CE marking that we would attach to this steel tank actually. And naturally, if we want to also declare the internal pressure, we would just go to this part of the standard section 5 and determine, see the instructions on how to determine the internal pressure, and then we will just declare it as part of the CE marking. But the thing to remember is that CE marking is just a list of essential characteristics, and you can decide which characteristics you declare from the list given out in the table in the standards appendix CA. So this is basically about the essential characteristics. Later we are going to take a closer look on how you can actually determine the characteristics, but here I just want to say that the characteristics are always listed in the standard, and also the way to determine them is also listed in the standard. And if you can remember, there's also the second step in each CE marking project, and it's setting up the factory production control system. And in this first lecture, we are not going to go too deeply into it, but the point of the factory production control system was to verify that the results that we received in the initial type testing are still valid in the future. And factory production control systems, how to set it up is also given out in the standard in the section 6.3 in this case. But the thing I would just like to mention here is that this system has nothing to do with quality management system like ISO 9001 or something like that. But the factory production control system on how to set it up and what's the scope of the system is given out in the same standard. And to summarize, the CE marking of product requires you to documentally determine the product's characteristics, essential characteristics. First, you must decide on which characteristics you want to determine, and then to determine them in the way that was specified in the standard. And then, the CE marking also requires you to develop an FPC system that is used to verify that these characteristics are still valid. And who must do what depends on the standard. So, do you need to get this FPC certification or not? Do you need to get a third party involved with the determining product's characteristics or not? It all depends on which system you got, and you can see that in the standard. And as a side note, I would just like to point out a few things about these CE markings, and especially the content of the CE markings and which characteristics you are going to declare as part of the CE mark. The first thing that we haven't really gone over yet is that if a characteristic is deemed as an essential, so it has been listed in the appendix ZA as being essential, it can only be declared as part of the CE marking, and that's it. So, for example, if the weldability is deemed to be an essential characteristics, and there is one way to determine it, that it has been specified in the standard, you as a manufacturer if you want to declare weldability, it must be done with the standard instruction and as a part of the CE mark, and that's it. And nowadays you cannot, for example, declare your product to be weldable or have a good fracture toughness or whatever in any other way besides the CE marking. So you cannot declare that your product is weldable or it has fracture toughness or something, or it has a material class of something in brochures or any other marketing material if it's not declared also as part of the CE marking. So that's the first thing. So, and the other thing I would like to just mention here is that even though the legislation lets you to just declare one characteristics, it might be sufficient now, because what we have noticed is that the customers and regulators don't really understand what the CE marking is. So what they are usually just requiring you to have is to have a CE mark product, and they are not really concerned about the characteristics that you are declaring or for the content of the CE marking. So at the moment, if you just want to get the CE marking right quickly and your customers don't know what they're asking for, you can just declare one characteristic and be over with it. But in our opinion, in the future, this will change, and as the CE markings become more common, the focus will shift from having a CE mark to the content of the CE mark. So in the future, it is likely that you should have more characteristics declared as part of the CE marking than just one, to make it easier for the customers to compare different products.